Vanessa Hart, a sharp-tongued flight attendant, smirks from the galley as passengers board the Atlanta to Seattle flight, her eyes narrowing at James Carter, a black man in a sleek blazer settling into first-class seat 2A. She mutters a vile slur, skips his row, and struts off, convinced he's misplaced. Mid-flight, the captain's voice booms. James is the airline's new regional manager, watching the crew. Vanessa's smug grin collapses into dread, her career dangling by a thread. What racist blunder just sealed her fate? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more gripping tales exposing truth. Vanessa Hart stood frozen in the galley of the Atlanta to Seattle flight, her pulse hammering in her ears as the captain's words echoed through the cabin. James Carter, the black man she'd snubbed, was the new regional manager, silently evaluating the crew. Her stomach twisted into a knot, a sour mix of panic and shame flooding her senses as she replayed her earlier muttered slur, her deliberate skip past his row. She'd thought him just another passenger, someone who didn't fit her, polished image of first class, but now the truth bore down like a sledgehammer. He held her career in his hands. Her crisp navy uniform felt tight, suffocating as she gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening. She couldn't just stand there, not with his eyes potentially on her, judging every move. She had to act, had to fix this before it spiraled further. Swallowing hard, she plastered a brittle smile across her face, the kind she'd perfected over 8 years of serving entitled businessmen and fussy retirees, and grabbed a tray of sparkling water. Her heels clicked unevenly against the floor as she approached seat 2A, her hands trembling so badly the glass clinked against the metal. James sat there, his sharp blazer unwrinkled, his posture calm and composed, flipping through a stack of papers with a focus that made her skin prickle. Up close, his presence was undeniable, a quiet strength radiating from the way he held himself, his dark eyes flicking up to meet hers as she stopped beside him. "Sir, would you like a drink?" she asked, her voice pitching higher than intended, the words tumbling out in a rush. He paused, his pen hovering over a page, and looked at her directly, his gaze steady and unreadable, cutting through her forced cheer like a blade. For a split second, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of her earlier slight. But his expression stayed neutral. "No, thank you," he said, his tone polite but clipped, each syllable measured. Then he returned to his papers, dismissing her without another glance. Vanessa's smile faltered, her cheeks burning as she nodded stiffly and backed away, the tray rattling in her grip. She retreated to the galley, her breath shallow, humiliation searing through her chest. He knew. He had to know. That look, that refusal. It wasn't just about the water. It was about her, about what she'd done. She shoved the tray onto the counter, water sloshing over the rim, and pressed her palms against her face, trying to steady herself. She'd dodged a bullet, hadn't she? He hadn't called her out, hadn't made a scene. Maybe she could still salvage this, play it off as a one-time lapse. But as she straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron, a murmur from the cabin snapped her back to reality. She peeked out, her eyes darting to seats 3B and 3C, where 2 white passengers, a balding man in a pinstripe suit and a woman with a pinched face and too much perfume, leaned close, their voices low but sharp. "Doesn't belong up here," the man hissed, his jowls quivering as he nodded toward James. "Probably got that seat on some quota," the woman added, her lips curling into a sneer. Vanessa's stomach lurched, a cold sweat breaking out across her neck. Their words mirrored her own thoughts from earlier, the ugly assumptions she'd let fester, and now they were out in the open, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. She should have ignored it, kept her head down, but something snapped inside her, a desperate need to distance herself from their venom, to prove she wasn't like them, not anymore. She stormed over, her smile gone, her voice tight. "Please keep it down," she said, her tone sharper than she meant, cutting through their whispers like a whip. The man's head jerked up, his eyes narrowing, while the woman clutched her, pearls, affronted. "Excuse me?" the man barked, his voice rising. "We're just talking. You don't get to police us." Vanessa's jaw clenched, her nails digging into her palms, but before she could respond, The woman jabbed the call button with a manicured finger, her glare boring into Vanessa. Within moments, the overhead speaker crackled and Margaret's voice, cold and clipped, filled the cabin. "Vanessa, report to me now. Unprofessional conduct is not tolerated." The words hit like a punch, public and humiliating, every passenger turning to stare as Vanessa stood there, exposed. Her eyes flicked to James, who sat still, his pen paused mid-sentence, his face unreadable but his attention clearly on her. She wanted to shrink into the floor, to disappear, but she forced her legs to move, trudging back to the galley where Margaret waited, her arms crossed, her graying hair pulled into a severe bun. "What was that?" Margaret snapped, her voice low but venomous. "You don't snap at passengers, especially not in first class. You're lucky I didn't write you up on the spot." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed, her throat dry. "They were being rude," she mumbled, her excuse sounding weak even to her own ears. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her lips thinning. "Handle it better next time. And don't think I didn't notice you hovering around 2A after ignoring him earlier. Fix your attitude, Vanessa, or you'll be answering to more than just me." She turned on her heel, leaving Vanessa alone, her breath hitching as the weight of it all crashed down. She'd tried to cover her tracks, to show she wasn't the person who'd skipped James, but it had backfired spectacularly. Margaret's reprimand was bad enough, a public slap across the face, but James hearing it, witnessing her stumble, that was worse. She glanced out at the cabin, catching the man in 3B smirking at her, a glint of triumph in his eyes, while James sat silently, his head tilted slightly, observing. She thought she'd dodged the worst of it, that Margaret's scolding was the end, a harsh but survivable hit. But as the flight droned on, the air thick with unspoken judgment, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that her flimsy attempt to claw back control had only dug her deeper into a hole she couldn't see the bottom of. Her career, her reputation, everything she'd built over 8 years, it all hung by a thread. And James Carter, the man she dismissed with a single glance, held the scissors. She leaned against the galley wall, her heart pounding, her mind racing with what-ifs. She'd made it through the moment, hadn't she? She'd taken the hit and stayed standing, but as the plane hummed through the sky, the tension simmering beneath the surface, she couldn't ignore the prickling at the back of her neck, the sense that something bigger, something uglier, was waiting just beyond the horizon, ready to pounce the second she let her guard down. Vanessa's heart slumped against the galley wall, her chest heaving as Margaret's reprimand still rang in her ears, the sting of public humiliation fresh and raw. The Atlanta to Seattle flight hummed along, the cabin lights dimming slightly as passengers settled into their seats. But for Vanessa, the air felt thick, electric with the weight of her mistake. James Carter, the new regional manager she'd snubbed, sat in 2A, his calm presence a silent accusation she couldn't shake. She'd tried to fix it, offering him that drink, snapping at those rude passengers, but it had all blown up in her face. Now what? Was she just going to stand there, letting him judge her from afar? No, she couldn't let it end like this. She had to show him she wasn't that person, the one who'd muttered that slur, who'd skipped his row like he didn't belong. She straightened her apron, smoothed her dark hair back into its tight bun, and squared her shoulders. 8 years on this job had taught her how to charm, how to perform, and she'd use every trick now to claw her way out of this mess. She grabbed a tray of snacks, her movements deliberate, and started her rounds through first class, determined to bury her shame under a flood of perfect service. She flashed her brightest smile at the woman in 1B, a middle-aged blonde in a cashmere sweater, refilling her wine with a warm, "Anything else I can get you, ma'am?" The woman beamed back, oblivious to the storm churning inside Vanessa. Next, she hit 3A, a grizzled man in a cowboy hat, offering him a blanket with a playful, "Keeping warm enough up here?" He chuckled, tipping his hat, and she felt a flicker of control return. She was good at this, wasn't she? She could turn it around, prove she treated everyone the same. As she moved down the aisle, she stole glances at James, catching him nodding slightly as she handed an elderly woman in 5C a pillow, her voice soft and attentive. "Here you go. Let's make sure you're comfortable," she said, tucking the pillow behind the woman's frail shoulders. The old lady patted her hand, murmuring thanks, and Vanessa's heart lifted. See that, James? She wasn't some bigot, she was just busy earlier, distracted. Maybe he'd buy it, maybe he'd let it slide. She kept going, pouring coffee, cracking small jokes, her confidence swelling with every grateful nod. She thought she had it in the bag, thought she'd flipped the script until the plane hit a pocket of turbulence, a sharp jolt that sent trays rattling and passengers gasping. Vanessa steadied herself against a seat, her tray clattering. But in 4A, a white passenger, Richard Holt, a burly businessman with a red face and a booming voice, wasn't so lucky. His whiskey splashed across his lap, soaking his tailored slacks, and he erupted, his roar cutting through the cabin noise. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, leaping to his feet, his meaty hands flailing. Vanessa turned, her smile freezing, as Richard's eyes locked not on her, but on James. 2 rows ahead. "You!" Richard shouted, pointing a thick finger at James, his voice dripping with venom. "This is your fault, isn't it? You don't belong up here, messing with our flight." The words hit Vanessa like a slap, raw and ugly, racial slurs, tumbling from Richard's mouth in a torrent. Boy. And worse, each one a dagger that made her flinch. The cabin went quiet, passengers craning their necks, some nodding faintly in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Vanessa's mind raced. What was she supposed to do? This wasn't just a spilled drink, this was a powder keg, and she was standing right next to it. Her training kicked in, her voice trembling as she stepped toward Richard, hands raised. "Sir, please calm down. It's just turbulence," she said, her tone meek, barely above a whisper, her eyes darting to James, praying he'd stay out of it. But Richard wasn't having it, his face purpling as he waved her off. "Don't tell me to calm down, sweetheart. This guy's bad luck sitting here like he owns the place." Vanessa's stomach churned, her earlier bravado dissolving. She should have shut him down, should have called Margaret, but her feet stayed rooted, her voice shrinking. "Please, sir, just sit," she mumbled, her hands twisting together, her resolve crumbling under the weight of his fury. The passengers watched, some smirking, others whispering, and Vanessa felt the heat of their stares, her failure laid bare. Then James moved. He stood slowly, his blazer still crisp, his face a mask of calm as he turned to Richard, his voice low but firm, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Sir, I suggest you take your seat. We're all just trying to get to Seattle." His tone was steady, authoritative, not a hint of anger, but it carried a weight that silenced the cabin. Richard blinked, his mouth opening then closing, his bluster faltering under James's unflinching gaze. He muttered something incoherent, slumping back into his seat, wiping at his pants with a scowl. Vanessa stood there, useless, her tray still clutched in her hands as James sat back down, resuming his work like nothing had happened. The turbulence smoothed out, the plane steadying, and she scurried back to the galley, her breath ragged, her mind spinning. She'd dodged it, hadn't she? James had handled it, not her. She hadn't had to take a stand, hadn't had to risk more trouble with Margaret. She leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from her brow, convincing herself she'd won a small victory. He'd seen her try, seen her serve everyone else, right? Maybe he'd let her off the hook. But as she peeked out, catching Richard's glare, his eyes burning with a promise of revenge, her relief curdled. "This isn't over," he mouthed, his lips curling into a sneer, and her gut twisted. What had she just walked into? Hey folks, what do you think? Comment number 1 if you'd have stood up to Richard's rant, or number 2 if you think Vanessa's cowardice is relatable under pressure. Should she have fought harder, or was she smart to stay quiet? Drop your thoughts below. Hit that like button if you're rooting for justice to win out, and subscribe to see how this mess explodes next. So, what's brewing with Richard's glare? Is he just a loudmouth, or does he have something nastier up his sleeve for Vanessa? Vanessa Hart lingered in the galley, her hands still clutching the snack tray, her breath uneven as the memory of Richard Holt's venomous glare burned in her mind. The Atlanta to Seattle flight droned on, the cabin settling into a fragile calm. After James Carter, the new regional manager, had shut down Richard's racist tirade with a single steady sentence, Vanessa's chest ached with a mix of relief and dread. her earlier attempt to impress James with flawless service now overshadowed by her failure to confront Richard's outburst. She'd stood there, mute and trembling, while James handled it, his cool authority exposing her weakness. She wiped her clammy palms on her apron, her dark eyes darting toward seat 2A, where James sat, his blazer still sharp, his focus back on his papers. Had he noticed her cowardice? Did he think she agreed with Richard? The thought gnawed at her, a splinter under her skin, but she shoved it down. She'd survived the moment, hadn't she? She just needed to keep her head low, ride out the flight, and pray James let it slide. The plane hummed through the clouds, the soft clink of glasses and rustle of newspapers filling the air. But Vanessa's reprieve shattered when Richard lurched from his seat in 4A, his bulk filling the aisle as he stormed toward the galley. His red face glistened with sweat, his whiskey-stained slacks clinging to his thighs, and his eyes locked onto her with a fury that made her stomach drop. She straightened, her tray clattering onto the counter, her heart thudding as he closed the distance, his breath heavy with liquor and rage. "You," he growled, jabbing a thick finger at her chest, stopping just short of touching her. "You're supposed to keep this cabin in line, not let some fraud sit up here like he's king." Vanessa's mouth went dry, her tongue sticking to the roof as she stared up at him, his looming frame blocking her escape. Richard's voice dropped, low and menacing, his words laced with contempt. "I paid good money for this seat, and I don't want him here. Do your damn job and get him out of first class, or I'll make sure you regret it." Her mind raced, a jumble of panic and protocol. She couldn't kick James out, not with his title, not with the captain's announcement still ringing in everyone's ears. But Richard's tone, his sheer presence, it pressed down on her like a physical weight, threatening to crush her flimsy resolve. "Sir," she managed, her voice a shaky whisper, "I can't do that. He's a passenger, same as you, and company policy." She trailed off, her words faltering as Richard's lips twisted into a sneer, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Policy?" he spat, leaning closer, his breath hot on her face. "You think I care about your little rules? I know people, sweetheart. People who can make your life hell. Move him now." Vanessa's knees wobbled, her hands gripping the counter behind her for support. She wanted to scream, to call Margaret, to do anything but stand there, but her body wouldn't move. "I can't," she repeated, louder this time, though it sounded more like a plea than a stand. Richard's sneer widened, a predator scenting weakness, and he straightened, brushing imaginary lint off his jacket. "Fine," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "You'll see." He turned, lumbering back to his seat, leaving Vanessa gasping, her pulse pounding in her temples. She sank against the wall, her breath ragged, trying to convince herself she'd won, that standing her ground, however feebly, had been enough. The flight stretched on, the minutes crawling by as she busied herself with small tasks, refilling cups, collecting trash, avoiding Richard's row like it was cursed. She thought she'd escaped his wrath, that his threat was just hot air, until the plane dipped slightly, signaling the start of descent. She was adjusting a passenger's overhead bin when Margaret's shadow fell over her, the supervisor's stern face etched with displeasure. "Galley now!" Margaret snapped, her voice cutting through the cabin hum. Vanessa followed, her stomach sinking, her earlier dread roaring back to life. In the cramped galley, Margaret held up a folded note, her fingers tight around it, her eyes boring into Vanessa's. "This came from 4A, she said, her tone icy. "He says you've been racist, favoring one passenger over others, making him feel targeted. Ring any bells?" Vanessa's breath caught, her mind scrambling. Richard. That bastard had twisted everything, turned her refusal into an attack. "That's not true," she stammered, her hands twisting together. "He wanted me to move someone. I said no, that's all." Margaret's lips thinned, her gaze unrelenting. "Doesn't matter what you say. It's what he says. And guess who's reviewing this mess when we land? Your new manager in 2A. Vanessa's heart stopped, her eyes widening as the pieces clicked together. James would see this, would read Richard's lie and pair it with her earlier neglect. "I didn't," she started, but Margaret cut her off, her voice sharp. "Save it. "You're on thin ice, Vanessa. One more slip and you're done." She shoved the note into Vanessa's hand and stalked off, leaving her alone, the paper crumpled in her fist. Vanessa unfolded it, her hands shaking, Richard's scrawled words glaring up at her. "She's a racist, sucking up to the black guy to save her ass. I'll make sure she pays." Her knees buckled, her back sliding down the wall as she stared at the note, the threat sinking in. She'd thought she'd dodged his anger, thought her weak stand had been enough, but Richard wasn't done. She glanced out at the cabin, catching his smirk as he leaned back in his seat, sipping a fresh drink, his eyes glinting with triumph. Then her gaze shifted to James, still silent, still watching, his pen moving steadily across his papers. Had he seen the note? Did he know what was coming? She clutched the paper tighter, her mind reeling. She'd survived his galley ambush, hadn't she? She'd held her ground, sort of. But as the plane descended, the air growing heavy with anticipation, Richard's smirk widened, and he mouthed something she couldn't quite catch, though the menace was clear. Her throat tightened, a cold certainty settling in her bones. He'd said she'd regret it, and now she understood. He wasn't just a loudmouth with a grudge. He had power, connections, and a plan. What had she done by crossing him? The note fluttered to the floor, her hands trembling as the plane tilted toward Seattle. The city lights flickering below, a distant promise of solid ground that felt further away than ever. She'd thought she'd escaped his wrath, but Richard's smug grin told her otherwise, a predator biding his time, ready to strike when she least expected it. Vanessa Hart stood in the galley, her fingers still clutching Richard Holt's crumpled note, her breath shallow as the plane's wheels kissed the tarmac in Seattle. The flight from Atlanta had been a gauntlet of humiliation, from her initial snub of James Carter, the new regional manager, to Richard's racist outburst and his chilling threat scrawled in ink. "She's a racist. I'll make sure she pays." The cabin lights flickered on, passengers unbuckling and stretching, their chatter a dull roar in her ears. But Vanessa couldn't move. Her navy uniform clung to her sweat-damp skin, her bun fraying as strands of dark hair stuck to her neck. She'd thought landing would bring relief, a chance to escape the nightmare of Richard's galley ambush and Margaret's stern warning that James would review his complaint. She'd held on to that thin hope, convincing herself she'd weathered the storm, that her shaky refusal to bow to Richard's demands had bought her a reprieve. The plane taxied to the gate, the soft thud of the jet bridge locking into place jolting her back to reality. She smoothed her apron, her hands trembling, and stepped into the aisle, forcing a tight smile as passengers shuffled past. James rose. From 2A, his blazer crisp, his dark eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second before he turned away, his silence heavier than any rebuke. Richard lumbered out of 4A, his whiskey-stained slacks dry now, his smirk sharp as a blade as he brushed past her, his shoulder clipping hers hard enough to sting. She winced, her breath catching, but he didn't look back, disappearing into the crowd. She exhaled, her shoulders slumping. It was over, wasn't it? The flight was done. The note was just words. She could clock out, go home, and pretend this day never happened. She grabbed her bag from the crew locker, her steps quick. As she headed for the gate, the cool Seattle air hitting her face like a promise of freedom, but as she reached the terminal, that promise shattered. Richard stood near the exit, surrounded by a cluster of passengers from first class, their voices rising in a heated buzz. The balding man from 3B and the perfumed woman from 3C flanked him, their faces twisted with indignation, gesturing wildly as they spoke. Vanessa slowed, her gut twisting as snippets of their words reached her. Unfair treatment, harassing us, favoring that guy. Her heart sank, a cold sweat breaking out across her back. They weren't just griping, they were organizing. Richard's eyes flicked to her, his smirk widening, and he raised his voice loud enough for the gate agents to turn. "She picked on us to kiss up to some diversity hire in 2A. We deserve better than this." The group nodded, a chorus of agreement swelling, and Vanessa's knees weakened. This wasn't just a complaint, it was a mob. She ducked behind a pillar, her breath hitching, watching as Richard waved the note like a trophy, rallying more passengers to join his cause. She wanted to run, to vanish into the crowd, but her feet stayed glued to the floor, her mind racing. How had it spiraled this far? She'd barely said a word to him after the turbulence, and now he'd twisted her into the villain. The terminal buzzed with activity, travelers streaming past, oblivious to the noose tightening around her career. Then a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Miss Hart!" Vanessa spun, her heart lurching as Linda Voss, the airline's HR rep, strode toward her, her gray suit stiff, her face a mask of cold efficiency. Linda's heels clicked against the tiles, her clipboard clutched like a weapon, and Vanessa's stomach dropped. "Follow me," Linda said, her tone flat, brooking. No argument. Vanessa trailed her, her legs heavy, her mind screaming as they veered into a small office off the gate, the door clicking shut behind them with a finality that made her flinch. The room was stark, a metal desk and 2 chairs under harsh fluorescent light, and there in the corner stood James, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Vanessa's breath caught, her eyes darting between him and Linda, her palms slick with sweat. "Sit," Linda ordered, pointing to a chair. Vanessa sank into it, her bag slipping to the floor, her hands twisting in her lap. Linda slapped the clipboard onto the desk, papers fanning out, Richard's note glaring up at her alongside a stack of passenger statements. "We've got a problem," Linda said, her voice clipped. "Multiple complaints from today's flight, all naming you. Unequal treatment, harassment, racial bias. Care to explain?" Vanessa's mouth opened, her throat dry as sand. "It's not true," she croaked, her voice breaking. "That man in 4A, Richard Holt, he's lying. He wanted me to move Mr. Carter. I said no, and now he's twisting it." Linda's eyes narrowed, her pen tapping the desk. "So you're saying a dozen passengers are wrong? They claim you targeted them to favor one person, and it matches this note. Your supervisor flagged it too." Vanessa's head snapped up, her pulse racing. "Margaret, she knows I didn't." Linda cut her off, her tone sharp. She said, "You've been erratic all flight, and Mr. Carter here observed everything." Vanessa's gaze swung to James, his silence deafening, his dark eyes locked on her, steady and unyielding. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Sir, I'm sorry. About earlier, I didn't mean to skip you. I was just busy, and then Richard, She trailed off, her words sounding hollow, desperate. James didn't blink, didn't nod, just watched, his presence a quiet storm she couldn't read. Linda sighed, flipping through the papers. "We take these allegations seriously, Miss Hart. Racism, real or perceived, damages our reputation. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation." Vanessa's world tilted, her breath stopping as the words sank in. Suspended. 8 years, gone in a heartbeat. "But I didn't do anything," she pleaded, her hands gripping the chair arms, her nails digging into the plastic. Linda stood, her expression unchanged. "That's for us to determine. You'll hear from us in a week. Until then, you're off duty." She nodded to James, who stepped forward, his voice low, measured. "I'll be reviewing this personally," he said, his words calm but heavy, each one a stone dropped into the pit of her stomach. Vanessa stared at him, her eyes wide, searching for mercy, for anything, but his face gave nothing away. Linda opened the door, gesturing her out, and Vanessa stumbled to her feet, her bag dragging behind her as she shuffled into the terminal, the noise crashing over her like a wave. Suspended. The word echoed, a death knell to her career, her life. She'd thought she'd escaped Richard's wrath, thought her weak stand in the galley had bought her safety, but it had only fed his fire. She glanced back, catching Richard still at the gate, his group dispersing, his smirk now a full grin, as he tipped an imaginary hat her way. Her suspension felt like a lifeline, a chance to regroup, but as she trudged toward the parking lot, the weight of James's gaze and Linda's cold verdict pressed down, a vice tightening around her chest. She'd landed, hadn't she? She was off the plane, free of the cabin's chaos. But as the Seattle rain began to fall, streaking the windows, she realized this wasn't the end. It was the start of something worse, something bigger, and Richard's grin promised he was just getting warmed up. Vanessa Hart trudged through the Seattle rain, her suspension notice crumpled in her pocket, her navy uniform damp and clinging as she unlocked her beat-up sedan in the airport lot. The sting of Linda Voss's words, "suspended pending investigation," looped in her mind, a relentless drumbeat drowning out the patter of raindrops on the windshield. James Carter, the regional manager she'd snubbed, had watched her unravel in that stark office, his calm promise to review her case echoing like a judge's gavel. She'd thought Richard Holt's passenger mob at the gate was the worst of it, his twisted complaint of her favoring James a final jab she could outlast. She'd been wrong. As she drove home, the city lights blurring through the wet glass, her phone buzzed incessantly, ignored calls from coworkers piling up. She silenced it, her hands shaking, convincing herself she'd ride out the week, prove her innocence, and reclaim her 8-year career. She collapsed onto her sagging couch, the dim apartment a cocoon of quiet, and powered on her laptop, desperate for a distraction. That's when she saw it. An email from an unknown address. Subject, line screaming in caps, "You messed with the wrong guy." Her stomach lurched as she clicked it open, Richard's name glaring back at her in bold. "Vanessa," it read, his tone dripping with glee. "You think you're safe hiding behind that black fraud in 2A. I'm Richard Holt, Holt Properties, board buddy of your airline CEO. Here's the deal. Testify he's unfit, aggressive, a liability, or I'll bury you. Your call." Her breath stopped, her eyes scanning the words again, the threat sinking in like ice water. Richard wasn't just some loudmouth businessman. He was a real estate titan with strings to pull, and he'd tied one around her neck. She slammed the laptop shut, her heart pounding, her mind racing. How did he get her email? What kind of pull did he have? She paced the worn carpet, her socks catching on frayed threads, replaying the flight. Her slur, her skip past James, Richard's. Rage. She'd refused him in the galley, and now he was weaponizing her suspension, turning it into a noose. She couldn't testify against James, not with his title, not with the truth staring her down. But doing nothing, that felt like handing Richard a loaded gun. She sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands, her resolve crumbling. She had to fight back, had to face James, beg him to see her side before Richard's lie took root. The next morning she drove to the airline's headquarters, her palms slick on the steering wheel, her uniform swapped for a plain sweater and jeans, the suspension stripping her of her usual armor. She found James in a glass-walled office, his blazer off, sleeves rolled up, papers spread across his desk. He looked up as she knocked, his dark eyes steady, unsurprised, like he'd been expecting her. "Mr. Carter," she started, her voice cracking, "I need to talk to you." He nodded, gesturing to a chair, his silence urging her on. She sat, her hands twisting in her lap, and spilled it all. Richard's email, his demand, her fear. "I'm not that person," she pleaded, tears welling up. "The one who ignored you. I messed up, I know, but I'm trying to change. Please don't let him ruin me." James leaned back, his fingers steepled, his gaze piercing through her desperation. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, just listened as her words tumbled out, raw and frantic. When she finished, he nodded slowly, his voice low, measured. "I see potential in you, Vanessa. Mistakes don't define you. Actions do. I'll reinstate you, give you a chance to prove it." Her breath caught, relief flooding her chest. A lifeline dangled just within reach. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping her eyes, her shoulders lifting. She left the office, her steps lighter, the rain outside now a soft drizzle, a sign of hope. She'd won, hadn't she? James believed her, saw past her blunder. She could go back, face the passengers, rebuild. But as she reached her car, her phone pinged, a notification from a local news site popping up. She tapped it, her blood running, cold as a video loaded, grainy footage from the flight. Her standing over James's row, turning away, the timestamp clear as day. The caption screamed, "Racist flight attendant exposed," credited to an anonymous source. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the wet pavement as comments flooded in. "Fire her. Disgusting. Boycott this airline." She stumbled back, her vision blurring, the world tilting as the internet erupted, her face plastered across screens, her career, her life, torched in seconds. She fumbled for her phone, rain streaking the cracked screen, and watched the video loop, her every move dissected by strangers. Richard. It had to be him. That smug bastard had filmed her, leaked it, turned her reinstatement into a trap. She'd thought James's mercy was her salvation, thought she'd outmaneuvered Richard's threat. But as the views ticked up, 10,000, 20,000, her chest tightened, a scream building in her throat. How had he done this so fast? Who else had he roped in? She'd walked out of that office a free woman, or so she'd believed, but now she was a pariah, the internet's latest villain, and Richard's email echoed in her skull. "I'll bury you." She sank against her car, rain soaking her sweater, her victory dissolving into ash. She'd begged James for a second chance, and he'd given it. But Richard had been waiting, his counterattack swift and brutal, a digital guillotine dropping on her fragile hope. The city buzzed around her, cars honking, people rushing past, oblivious to the storm tearing her apart. She'd thought she'd escaped the noose, but as the video spread, likes and shares climbing into the millions, she realized Richard had only tightened it, his grin lurking behind every pixel, promising more pain to come. Hey folks, what's your take? Comment number 1 if you think Vanessa deserved that second chance from James, or number 2 if Richard's dirty video trick proves she's too far gone. Would you fight a creep like Richard, or run from his power? Drop your thoughts below. Hit like if you're raging at this injustice, and subscribe to catch how Vanessa battles this wildfire. So, what's Richard's next move? Is he done swinging, or has he got a sharper blade hidden up his sleeve? Vanessa's heart slumped against her rain-soaked car in the Seattle airport lot, her cracked phone trembling in her hands as the viral video looped endlessly. Her turning away from James Carter's row. The caption, "Racist flight attendant exposed," searing into her brain. The views had skyrocketed past 1 million, comments flooding in like a tidal wave, each one a jagged stone hurled at her fragile shell. "She's trash. Cancel her. Jail this bigot." Her sweater clung to her shivering frame, the drizzle a cold shroud as Richard Holt's digital dagger sank deeper. She'd begged James, the regional manager she'd snubbed, for mercy at headquarters, and he'd reinstated her, a lifeline she'd clutched with tear-streaked gratitude. Now, that lifeline was ash, torched by Richard's leak, his email threat. "I'll bury you." No longer a warning, but a promise fulfilled. She stumbled into her car, her breath fogging the windshield, her mind a chaotic whirl. How had he turned her moment of grace into this? Who was filming that day? She drove home, the city's gray blur mocking her, and locked herself in her dim apartment, the walls closing in as notifications pinged relentlessly. She muted her phone, tossed it onto the couch, and paced, her socks scuffing the worn carpet. She had to go back, had to face the fire James had thrown her into with that reinstatement. She couldn't hide forever, not with her name trending, her face plastered across every screen. The next day, she returned to work, her suspension lifted but her spirit battered, her Navy uniform a flimsy shield against the storm. The return flight to Atlanta loomed, and as she boarded, passengers' eyes followed her, whispers slithering through the cabin like snakes. She felt their phones lift, lenses glinting, filming her every step as she moved to the galley, her hands shaking as she prepped the drink cart. She caught glimpses of their screens, that damn video playing on loop, her shame a public spectacle. She gritted her teeth, her jaw aching, and pushed the cart into first class, determined to prove James right, to show she could rise above the wreckage. James sat in 2A again, his blazer sharp, his dark eyes tracking her as she approached, her heart pounding. "Coffee, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, pouring with precision. No spills, no mistakes. He nodded, a faint, "Thank you," his gaze softening slightly, and she seized the chance, serving every passenger with flawless care. She refilled water for the elderly woman in 5C, her smile warm. "Need anything else, ma'am?" She swapped a pillow for the cowboy in 3A, her tone light. "Comfy now?" Each gesture was deliberate, a performance for James, for the cameras, for herself. The cabin buzzed, some passengers softening, others still sneering, but she kept going, her resolve hardening. Mid-flight, as she handed out snacks, James stood, his voice cutting through the hum. "Folks, a word," he said, calm but firm, turning heads. "I've seen Vanessa work today. She's professional, attentive. Let's give her a chance to do her job." The cabin quieted, a ripple of nods spreading, and Vanessa's chest swelled, her eyes stinging with relief. He'd vouched for her, publicly, a shield against the hate. She thought she'd turned it, thought she'd clawed back some ground, her hands steadying as she poured another coffee, her breath evening out. The crew relaxed, Margaret even giving her a curt nod, and Vanessa dared to hope. Maybe she'd survive this. Maybe James's faith would carry her through. But as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, a sharp rap on the galley door jolted her back. A man in a cheap suit, his badge glinting, shoved a thick envelope into her hands, his voice gruff. "Vanessa Hart? You've been served." Her fingers fumbled, tearing it open, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. Defamation lawsuit. Richard Holt versus Vanessa Hart, $10 million. Her knees buckled, the papers slipping as she read his claim. Her public apology to, James slandered him, ruined his reputation after the turbulence clash. Her head spun, her stomach churning. This wasn't just online hate. This was a calculated strike, Richard's wealth and spite distilled into ink. She clutched the counter, her vision blurring, as the captain's voice crackled overhead. "Folks, we've got a situation. Prepare for an unscheduled landing in Denver." The plane tilted, passengers gasping, and Vanessa's heart stopped as Margaret stormed in, her face thunderous. "What did you do now?" she snapped, snatching the papers. "Legal trouble mid-flight? You're off this plane now." The descent was chaos, seatbelts clicking, trays rattling, and Vanessa stood frozen, the lawsuit trembling in her grip. The captain's voice returned, tense. "Security issue. We're grounding in Denver." The plane hit the runway hard, tires screeching, and as it taxied to a stop, 2 officers boarded, their boots heavy on the carpet. "Vanessa Hart," one barked. "Step out." She stumbled forward, her legs numb, the passengers' stares boring into her, phone still rolling. James watched from 2A, his expression unreadable, his earlier praise now a distant echo. The officers escorted her off, the jet bridge a tunnel of shame, the lawsuit a lead weight in her hands. She'd thought she'd won, thought James's words had rebuilt her, but Richard had struck again, his legal bomb dropping her into a deeper pit. The Denver terminal loomed, cold and unforgiving as the officers flanked her, the plane's engines whining behind her. She'd faced the public crucible, served flawlessly under fire, and James had backed her, hadn't he? But as the officers led her away, the lawsuit's pages fluttering, Richard's shadow loomed larger, his smirk haunting her from 1,000 miles away. The emergency landing stranded her, her victory snatched by his relentless vengeance. And she realized this wasn't the bottom. It was a ledge, and the fall was still coming. Vanessa Hart stood shivering in the Denver terminal, the cold tile biting through her socks as the officers who'd escorted her off the Atlanta-bound flight loomed nearby, their radios crackling with static. Richard Holt's defamation lawsuit trembled in her hands, $10 million in damages, a grotesque weight that pinned her to this unexpected purgatory. The plane she'd been yanked from sat outside, its engines still cooling after the emergency landing triggered by her legal mess, passengers peering through the windows at her disgrace. James Carter, the regional manager she'd snubbed then served flawlessly, had watched her go, his earlier praise drowned out by the chaos of her exit. Her navy uniform was rumpled, her apron lost somewhere in the shuffle, and her dark hair hung loose, framing a face pale with shock. The lawsuit claimed her public apology to James had slandered Richard, a lie so absurd it made her stomach churn. But the legal papers were real, the ink black and unforgiving. She'd thought she'd hit bottom with the viral video, thought James's reinstatement and mid-flight vouching had pulled her back, but Richard's relentless vengeance had stranded her here, a pariah in a city she didn't know. The officers stepped back, murmuring about procedure, leaving her alone with her bag and her panic. She fumbled for her phone, the cracked screen flickering as she dialed Tara, her best friend and fellow flight attendant, the one person she trusted to anchor her in this storm. "Tara, it's me," she croaked when the call connected, her voice raw. "I'm in Denver. They pulled me off the flight. Richard sued me. 10 million, I need you. Tara's voice came through, soft but tense. Oh, Vanessa. That's awful. Hang on, okay? I'll talk to the crew, see what I can do. You're not alone in this. Vanessa exhaled, her shoulders sagging, a flicker of warmth cutting through the chill. Tara would help, wouldn't she? She'd vouch for her, tell James the truth, pull her out of this nightmare. Thank you, she whispered, clinging to the lifeline as she hung up. Her breath fogging in the terminal's frigid air, she sank onto a bench, her bag clutched to her chest, the lawsuit papers rustling as she replayed the flight. Her perfect service, James's nod, the lawsuit's sudden drop. She'd faced the public hate, survived the cameras, and now Tara would back her up. She just had to wait, hold on until the airline sorted this mess. Hours crawled by, the terminal emptying as night fell, the rain streaking the windows in relentless sheets. Her phone buzzed, a news alert lighting up the screen, and her heart stopped as she tapped it. Flight attendant's racist text leaked, the headline blared, and below it, screenshots of her own words, sent to Tara weeks ago before that fateful flight. New guy in 2A's uppity, thinks he's hot stuff. Her stomach plummeted, bile rising as she scrolled, more messages spilling out, each one a dagger. Can't stand these types in first class. He's all attitude, no class. The comments exploded. She's done. Pure hate. Lock her up. The internet feasting on her corpse anew. Her hands shook, her vision blurring as tears stung her eyes. How? These were private late-night vents to Tara, her safe space. She dialed Tara again, her fingers clumsy, her voice breaking as it connected. Tara, what the hell? Those texts, they're everywhere. Did you? Tara's silence stretched, heavy and damning, before she spoke, her tone flat. I'm sorry, Vanessa. Richard got to me. He offered 10 grand, said it'd help his case. I didn't think it'd blow up like this. Vanessa's breath stopped, her chest caving in as the betrayal sliced through her. You sold me out, she whispered, her voice a ghost. For money? Tara sighed, faint and distant. I needed it. You were already sinking. I didn't mean... Vanessa hung up, the phone clattering to the bench, her hands clawing at her hair as sobs racked her. Tara, her rock, had handed Richard the match to burn her alive. The texts weren't lies, she'd sent them, her prejudice, spilling out in careless moments, but they were hers, not the world's. Now they were ammunition, Richard's lawsuit fattened by her own words, her shame a public bonfire. She curled into herself, the terminal's hum a dull roar, her mind spinning. She'd hit rock bottom, hadn't she? The video, the suspension, the lawsuit, now this. She couldn't fall further, but as the rain pounded outside, her phone buzzed again, a new number flashing. She answered, her voice hollow. Vanessa Hart? James's voice, steady and low, cut through the static. It's James Carter. I've seen the news. Meet me in Seattle tomorrow noon, my office. This is your final chance. Her breath caught, her head snapping up, the words a lifeline in the dark. Final chance? She echoed, her throat tight. To prove you're more than this, he said, firm but not cruel. Be there. The call ended, her phone slipping into her lap as she stared into the rain, her tears mixing with the damp on her cheeks. Tara's stab had gutted her, Richard's leak had buried her, but James was offering a thread, thin and fraying, to climb out. She'd thought she was done, thought betrayal was the end, but as she sat there, stranded and broken, his voice lingered, a faint spark in the wreckage. She'd lost everything, her friend, her dignity, her career teetering on a knife's edge. But James's call dangled something, a shot at redemption, or a final judgment. She wiped her face, her hands trembling, and grabbed her bag, the lawsuit, and texts a leaden weight. She'd thought rock bottom was a floor, but it was a trap door, and James's final chance was the only rope left. The Denver night pressed in, the terminal a cold cage, and she realized Richard's victory wasn't complete, not yet. But as she stood, her legs unsteady, the sting of Tara's knife twisted deeper, and she wondered if this chance was salvation or just another step into his waiting jaws? Vanessa Hart slumped on the Denver terminal bench, her cracked phone clutched in her trembling hands, James Carter's voice still ringing in her ears. This is your final chance. The rain hammered the windows, a relentless drumbeat matching, the pulse pounding in her temples as Tara's betrayal, leaking those damning texts, burned fresh in her chest. Richard Holt's lawsuit, the viral video, the mid-flight grounding, all of it had stripped her bare, her 8-year career a smoldering. She'd thought Tara's stab was the end, but James, the regional manager she'd snubbed, had thrown her a rope, a noon meeting in Seattle to prove she was more than her mistakes. She boarded a red-eye flight, her Navy uniform swapped, for a wrinkled hoodie, her bag a lifeline as she landed at dawn. The city's gray skyline a grim welcome. She stumbled into a coffee shop, gulping black brew to steady her nerves, her reflection in the window a ghost. Hollow eyes, messy hair, a woman clinging to a shred of hope. At noon, she stood outside James's office at Airline headquarters, her breath shallow, her hands smoothing her hoodie as she knocked. He opened the door, his blazer off, his dark eyes steady, but not cold, gesturing her inside. The room was sparse, a desk piled with files, a window overlooking the tarmac, and she sat, her knees pressed together, her voice cracking as she began. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry," she said, tears spilling over, her words raw and unscripted. "I was wrong that day skipping you, saying those things in the texts. It's not who I am, not who I want to be. I've been fighting to show it, but Richard, he's destroying me." Her voice broke, her hands twisting in her lap, and she poured out everything, the slur, the galley standoff, the video, the lawsuit, Tara's knife in her back. James listened, his face unreadable, his fingers steepled as she bared her soul, her sobs echoing in the quiet. When she finished, wiping her face with her sleeve, he leaned forward, his voice low, firm. "Vanessa, I see regret. I see effort. I'm assigning you to a VIP flight tomorrow, high-profile passengers. Show me you've changed, not just with words, but with what you do." Her breath caught, her eyes widening, a lifeline thicker than she'd dared hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her chest swelling, her hands unclenching. She left the office, the rain now a drizzle, her steps lighter, a flicker of pride sparking in her gut. She'd convinced him, hadn't she? She'd bared her flaws, and he'd given her a shot, a real one. The next day, she boarded the VIP flight Seattle to Los Angeles, her uniform crisp, her bun tight, her resolve steel. The cabin gleamed, leather seats filled with suits and celebrities, their chatter a low hum as she moved through, her smile warm, her hands steady. She served champagne to a tech mogul in 1A, her voice smooth. "Enjoy, sir," and adjusted a pillow for a pop star in 3B. "Comfortable, ma'am." Each gesture was perfect, her training honed to a razor's edge, and the passengers nodded, some clapping softly as she passed, their approval a balm to her wounds. James watched from 5A, his blazer sharp, his nod subtle but clear, and she felt it. Redemption. Real and tangible. She'd done it. Proved she could rise above the hate, the texts, the lies. The flight soared, the sky clear, and she thought she'd turned the corner, thought this was her win, her slate wiped clean. But as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, the cabin door swung open, and Richard Holt strode in, his bulk filling the aisle, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the whiskey-stained slacks of that first flight. Vanessa froze, her tray clattering, her heart slamming against her ribs as he flashed a boarding pass, a last-minute VIP add-on, his smirk a blade aimed at her throat. Passengers turned, whispers rippling, and he took 2B, his eyes locked on her, gleaming with triumph. She forced her legs to move, serving him water, her hands shaking, her voice a whisper. "Sir?" He leaned close, his breath hot, and hissed, "You thought you'd win?" Before she could react, he clutched his chest, his face contorting, and collapsed into the aisle, his glass crashing, water soaking the carpet. "She poisoned me," he roared, his voice a theatrical bellow, passengers gasping, phones lifting. Vanessa stumbled back, her tray falling, her mind reeling as medics rushed from the back, summoned by some unseen signal, their kits banging against seats. Chaos erupted, the mogul shouting, the pop star shrieking, and Richard writhed, faking convulsions, his eyes glinting with glee as the medics swarmed. The captain's voice crackled. "Emergency landing, Boise." The plane banking. Hard, seatbelts clicking, trays tumbling. Vanessa stood, numb, as officers boarded in Boise, their cuffs cold on her wrists, dragging her off. The passengers' stares a mix of shock and disgust. James watched, his face unreadable, as she was hauled down the jet bridge. Richard staged. Collapse a masterstroke, her poisoning a lie that turned her VIP triumph into a crime scene. She'd thought she'd redeemed herself, thought James's faith and her flawless service had saved her. But as the cuffs tightened, the terminal looming, Richard's smirk haunted her from the stretcher, his counterattack a brutal twist that snatched her victory and plunged her into a new abyss. Hey folks, what's your take on this wild turn? Comment number 1 if you think Vanessa's effort deserved James's trust, or number 2 if Richard's fake-out proves she's cursed by her past. Would you keep fighting after a betrayal like Tara's, or call it quits? Drop your thoughts below, hit like if you're stunned by this VIP chaos, and subscribe to see how Vanessa escapes this trap. So what's Richard cooking up next? Did he just outsmart her, or is there a darker game afoot? Vanessa Hart sat in a Boise holding cell, the cold metal bench biting into her thighs, her wrists still raw from the cuffs that had dragged her off the VIP flight. Richard Holt's staged collapse, his theatrical cry of, "She poisoned me," echoed in her skull. A nightmare looped on repeat as the memory of passengers' gasps and flashing phones seared her mind. The Seattle to Los Angeles plane had diverted to Boise, its emergency landing a chaotic blur of medics and officers, all orchestrated by Richard's vicious lie. Her Navy uniform was gone, swapped for a scratchy orange jumpsuit, her dark hair, tangled and loose, her face a mask of shock and exhaustion. James Carter, the regional manager she'd snubbed then fought to impress, had watched her arrest, his silence a weight she couldn't decipher. She'd thought his VIP assignment was her redemption, her flawless service a shield against the viral video, the lawsuit, Tara's betrayal. But Richard had turned it into a trap, framing her for assault in front of a plane full of witnesses. The cell's fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows as she clutched her knees, her breath shallow. She'd been booked, fingerprinted, her mugshot snapped, the flash blinding as the officer barked, "Look up." Now, she waited, the clock ticking past midnight, her mind racing. How had Richard pulled this off? Who'd slipped him that last-minute boarding pass? She'd served him water, nothing else, her hands steady despite his smirk, but he'd collapsed anyway, his performance Oscar-worthy. The medics had whisked him away, his stretcher rolling past as she stood cuffed, his eyes glinting with triumph. She'd thought James's faith had saved her, thought her arrest was a misunderstanding he'd fix, but hours stretched on, the cell door unyielding, her hope fraying, her phone confiscated, sat in evidence, and she had one call left. She stumbled to the payphone, her fingers trembling as she dialed James, her voice hoarse when he picked up. "Mr. Carter, it's Vanessa," she said, her words tumbling out. "Richard set me up, I didn't poison him, you saw me serve him, please help me." Static crackled, then his voice calm but firm. "I'm on it, Vanessa. Stay put. I'll get you out." Relief flooded her, her knees buckling as she leaned against the wall, his promise a lifeline in the dark. "Thank you," she whispered, hanging up, her breath steadying. He'd seen it, hadn't he? He'd been there. He knew the truth. She sank back onto the bench, her hands unclenching, clinging to his words as the night dragged on. Dawn broke, gray light seeping through a slit window, and the cell door clanged open, an officer tossing her bag at her feet. "You're bailed," he grunted, and she scrambled up, her heart leaping as she followed him out, the jail's stale air giving way to the crisp Boise morning. James waited in the lobby, his blazer crisp, his dark eyes steady as he handed her a coffee, his voice low. "I paid it. We're digging into this. Richard's not untouchable." She nodded, sipping the bitter brew, her chest swelling with gratitude. "I owe you," she said, her voice thick, her hoodie pulled tight against the chill. She'd thought she'd rot in there, thought Richard's lie had won, but James had pulled her out, a knight in a suit, She climbed into his rental car, the city blurring past as he drove her to a motel, promising, "We'll fight this." She checked in, collapsing onto the lumpy bed, her body aching, her mind easing. She'd escaped the cell, hadn't she? James was on her side, digging for proof. She drifted into a fitful sleep, the first in days, dreaming of clear skies. But the reprieve shattered when her phone, returned with her bag, buzzed awake, a news alert flashing. Flight attendant caught on tape poisoning VIP. Her stomach dropped as she tapped it, a security video loading, grainy but damning. Her leaning over Richard's seat, her hand hovering, a faint blur suggesting she'd slipped, something into his glass. The timestamp matched, the angle perfect, and comments roared. Guilty. She's a monster. Death penalty. Her breath stopped, her hands shaking as she replayed it, her voice a whisper. That's not me. It wasn't. She'd served water, nothing else. But the tape lied. A forgery so slick it fooled the world. Richard's tech goon had struck, planting evidence that turned her bail into a noose. She called James, her voice frantic. The video, it's fake, you have to believe me. He sighed, his tone heavy. I saw it. It's bad, Vanessa. Her heart sank, her plea cut off as the motel TV blared the same footage, the anchor announcing, Airline terminates Vanessa Hart, effective immediately. Her phone slipped, clattering to the floor. Her job gone, her life unraveling. She'd thought James's bail was freedom, thought he'd fight for her. But as the day wore on, a lawyer knocked, delivering a deposition notice. James testifying against her, citing her pattern of bias from the first flight to the texts, corroborating Richard's claim. Her knees gave out, her scream muffled by her hands as the betrayal hit. Sharper than Tara's, deeper than the cuffs. Richard's lawsuit swelled. Now, attempted murder. 10 million ballooning to 20. His lawyers on every channel, spinning the tape as proof. She'd escaped the cell, hadn't she? James had bailed her, promised justice. But as the motel, walls closed in, the forged video looping, James's testimony a final blow, she realized she'd traded one prison for another, a cage of lies built by Richard's wealth and her own past, with no key in sight. Vanessa Hart sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed in Boise, her cracked phone trembling in her hands as the forged security tape looped on the TV. Her image slipping something into Richard Holt's drink, a lie that had cost her job and branded her a would-be murderer. The airline's termination notice still stung, James Carter's deposition against her, citing her pattern of bias, a betrayal sharper than Tara's, twisting the knife deeper. Richard's lawsuit had ballooned to 20 million. Attempted murder now his war cry. The internet a howling mob baying for her blood. Her orange jumpsuit lay discarded, swapped for a stained hoodie and jeans, her dark hair a wild tangle, framing a face hollowed by exhaustion. She'd thought James's bailout was her lifeline, thought his promise to fight would free her from this prison of lies. But his testimony had slammed the cell door shut, leaving her alone in a motel room that reeked of stale smoke and despair. The walls pressed in, the TV's drone a relentless assault, and she clutched her head, her nails digging into her scalp. She couldn't just sit here, couldn't let Richard win, not like this. He'd framed her, turned her redemption into a noose, but she wasn't dead yet. She had to fight, had to claw her way out before his next blow landed. She grabbed her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys, digging into Richard Holt's past, her desperation a flickering torch in the dark. Hours bled into the night, coffee cups piling up, her eyes burning as she scoured news archives, property, records, anything. Then she found it, a string of lawsuits from the 90s, Richard accused of evicting black tenants, redlining neighborhoods, his empire built on racist bones. Her breath caught, her hands steadying as she copied links, names, dates, an arsenal of dirt. Was this her shot? Could she turn his own history against him? She emailed it all to a local blogger, Truth Seeker 88, her message blunt. Expose this monster. He's framing me. She hit send, her chest tight, her hope fragile but fierce. By morning, the blog post went live. Real estate mogul's racist past revealed, the internet pivoting. Hashtags like You Holt exposed trending. As his stock plummeted, Holt Properties shares tanking 10 points in hours. Vanessa watched from the motel, her coffee cold, a grim smile tugging at her lips. She'd hit him, hadn't she? She'd flipped the script, turned the mob on him. Her phone buzzed, notifications piling up, strangers cheering her leak. Finally, justice. Get him, girl. She stood, her legs shaky, her hoodie pulled tight as she paced, daring to believe she'd won. That Richard's empire would crumble under the weight of his own sins. She'd fought back, used her wits, her last shred of strength. And it was working. The day stretched on, the story spreading, news channels picking it up, analysts dissecting Holt's fall. She thought she'd turned the tide, thought this was her comeback, her breath evening out as she sank onto the bed, exhaustion tugging at her. But as dusk fell, a knock rattled the door, sharp and insistent. She froze, her heart lurching, her mind flashing to James, maybe here to apologize, to help. She cracked the door, peering out, and the world exploded. Two men, hulking shadows in black hoods, shoved inside, their fists slamming into her before she could scream. She hit the floor, her cheek splitting against the carpet, blood pooling as boots crashed into her ribs, her arms, her legs. "Shut up," one growled, his voice gravelly, "or you die." Pain seared through her, her vision blurring as she curled into a ball, her gasps ragged, her hands clawing at nothing. The other kicked her stomach, a sickening thud, and snarled, "This is from Holt. Back off." They towered over her, their breath hot, then turned, vanishing into the night, the door banging shut behind them. Vanessa lay there, blood dripping from her nose, her body a map of bruises, her sobs choking out in the silence. She thought she'd won, thought her leak had broken Richard. But he'd struck back, harder, crueler, his goons a physical echo of his digital war. She dragged herself to the bed, her hands shaking, her breath a wheeze as pain stabbed her ribs. She fumbled for her phone, the screen cracked but alive, and dialed James, her voice a broken whisper. "They beat me," she rasped, blood streaking, her chin. "Richard's men, they help me." Static crackled, then his voice urgent. "Where are you?" She croaked the motel's name, her strength fading, and he said, "Hold on, I'm coming." The call dropped, her phone slipping as she collapsed, her blood staining the sheets, her victory a mirage shattered by fists and boots. Sirens wailed, in the distance growing closer, and she clung to consciousness, James's promise her only tether. She'd fought, hadn't she? She'd hit Richard where it hurt, watched his stock crash, thought she'd outsmarted him, but as she lay there, broken and bleeding, the motel room spinning, his goons' warning echoed, "Back off or die." And she realized her desperate fight back had only painted a bigger target on her back. The door burst open, paramedics rushing. In, James behind them, his face taut with worry as they lifted her onto a stretcher, her body screaming with every move. She'd escaped the cell, the lies, thought she'd turned the tables. But Richard's assault proved he'd never stop, his vengeance a beast with teeth, and as the ambulance doors slammed, her eyes fluttered shut, the fight draining out of her, leaving only pain and a fragile hope that James could pull her from this abyss. Vanessa Hart lay in a Boise hospital bed, her body a patchwork of bruises and bandages, the sterile stench of antiseptic stinging her nose as monitors beeped a steady rhythm. Richard Holt's goons had beaten her bloody in that motel room, their fists and boots a savage retort to her leaked expose of his racist past, his stock crashing as the internet turned on him. James Carter, the regional manager she'd snubbed then fought to redeem herself to, had rushed to her side, his blazer rumpled, his dark eyes fierce with resolve as paramedics hauled her from the wreckage. Her ribs ached with every breath, her split cheek throbbing under gauze, her hoodie swapped for a thin gown that did little to warm her. She'd thought her fight back had won, thought the bloggers' post and Holt Properties' plummeting shares had broken Richard's grip. But his assault had shattered that illusion, his warning, "Back off or die," a promise etched in her flesh. James sat beside her, his voice low, urgent. "We've got enough now, Vanessa. The leak, the beating, it's a pattern. I'm rallying the airline to sue him. Conspiracy, assault, the works." Her eyes, swollen and red, met his, a flicker, of hope sparking through the pain. "You mean it?" she rasped, her throat raw. He nodded, firm. "He's gone too far. We'll take him down." She sank back, her head spinning, relief mingling with exhaustion. James was fighting for her, wasn't he? He'd seen her struggle, her leak, her blood, and now he'd wield the airline's power to crush Richard. Days blurred, her recovery slow, painkillers dulling the edges as James worked behind the scenes, his calls and visits a lifeline. She testified from her bed, her voice shaky but clear, detailing Richard's threats, the email, the goons, the airline's legal team scribbling furiously. The case built, evidence piling up, and news broke. Holt Properties sued by Airline. For conspiracy, Richard arrested, cuffs snapping on his wrists as cameras flashed. Vanessa watched from her hospital TV, her lips parting, a tear slipping down her bandaged cheek. She'd done it, hadn't she? She'd fought, bled, and now Richard was locked up, his empire crumbling. James returned, his face grim but triumphant. "He's detained, Vanessa. The tape's been debunked. Your job's back if you want it. We won." Her chest swelled, her hands gripping the sheets, a fragile victory blooming. She'd turned the tables, survived his wrath, and James had delivered justice. She nodded, her voice a whisper. "Thank you." Her eyes shining as he squeezed her hand, a rare warmth in his grip. She thought it was over, thought the cuffs on Richard were the end, her reinstatement a phoenix rising from the ashes. But as she slept that night, the hospital quiet, a shadow moved. Richard's bail posted, a shadowy board member with deep pockets springing him free, his smirk flashing on late-night news. Holt released, vows revenge. She woke to a call from Linda Voss, the HR rep's voice cold. "Vanessa, the board's flipped. James is out, fired for overreach. You're reinstated, a PR stunt to quiet the noise." Her stomach dropped, her bandages itching as panic clawed her throat. James gone. Her rock, sacked for fighting for her. She stumbled from bed, her IV tugging, and turned on the TV. Richard's face leering back, free and untouchable. She returned, to work days later, her body still tender, her uniform a tight fit over healing scars, boarding a flight from Boise to Seattle. Passengers booed as she stepped in, their jeers sharp. Racist. Killer. Phones filming her every flinch. She pushed the cart, her hands trembling, her smile forced. James's absence a void beside her. She'd thought she'd won, thought Richard's arrest had sealed it. But as the plane climbed, the intercom crackled, the captain's voice tight. "Folks, we've got a bomb threat. Diverting now." Her heart stopped, passengers screaming, trays crashing as the plane banked hard, the cabin a chaos of panic. She froze, her cart tipping, her mind racing. Richard, it had to be him, his allies striking from the shadows. The plane lurched, oxygen masks dropping, and she stumbled to the galley, her breath ragged as the captain barked, "Emergency landing, Spokane." The descent was a nightmare, turbulence shaking the fuselage, passengers weeping, praying, and Vanessa clung to the counter, her bruises throbbing, her victory a cruel joke. The plane hit Spokane's runway, tires screeching, emergency slides deploying as sirens wailed outside. She led the evacuation, her voice hoarse, "This way, stay calm." Her legs shaking as passengers scrambled out, some shoving, others filming her still. The threat traced back to an anonymous call. Holt's orders, the news later confirmed, his network unbowed, his reach a hydra she couldn't slay. She stood on the tarmac, smoke curling from the plane's brakes, her uniform torn, her reinstatement a trap that had plunged her back into chaos. James's firing, Richard's release, the booze, the bomb, it all crashed over her, a tidal wave of defeat. She thought she'd beaten him, thought the airline suit and his arrest were the end. But as she stared at the burning plane, her body aching, her spirit fracturing, she realized Richard's final blow had landed, his vengeance a storm she couldn't outrun, trapping her in a nightmare with no escape. Vanessa Hart stood on the Spokane tarmac, her torn Navy uniform clinging to her bruised frame as smoke curled from the Boeing's brakes, the bomb threat that had forced the emergency landing still ringing in her ears. Passengers stumbled from the slides, their screams fading into the wail of sirens, the chaos a brutal cap to Richard Holt's relentless vengeance. Her reinstatement flight from Boise had turned into a war zone, the boos of passengers drowned by the terror of masks dropping and trays crashing, Richard's shadowy allies delivering his final blow from beyond jail bars. James Carter, the regional manager who'd fought for her, was gone, fired by a board that propped her up as a PR pawn, her victory over Richard's arrest a fleeting mirage. Her ribs ached from his goons' beating, her face a map of cuts and shadows, but she moved, her voice hoarse as she guided passengers to safety. "Keep moving. Over here." Her legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion. The plane smoldered. Behind her, its hull intact but scarred, a testament to the havoc Richard had wrought. The viral video, the forged tape, the lawsuit, the assault, now this. She'd thought she'd won when James sued him. Thought his cuffs marked the end, but his release in this attack proved his reach was a beast she couldn't slay. Firefighters swarmed, hoses blasting, and she sank to her knees, her hands shaking, her breath a ragged sob. She'd led the evacuation, saved lives, hadn't she? She'd held it together, a flicker of strength in the wreckage. But as the smoke thickened, her spirit cracked, Richard's smirk haunting her from 1,000 miles away. Then James appeared, his blazer singed, his dark eyes fierce as he pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside her, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Vanessa, listen," he said, his voice cutting through the din, urgent and steady. "This wasn't random. I set it up." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, pain forgotten as his words hit like a slap. "What?" she croaked, her throat raw, her mind reeling. He gripped her tighter, his face taut with something between guilt and resolve. "The bomb threat, it was me. A test. I had to know if you'd break or fight, if you'd learned anything from this hell. You didn't break." Her breath stopped, her hands clawing at the asphalt as the revelation sank in. A gut punch sharper than Tara's betrayal, than Richard's fists. "You did this?" she whispered, her voice trembling, tears streaking, her soot-streaked face. "You put us through that?" James nodded, his jaw tight. "I leaked a fake threat, coordinated with security. No real bomb, just chaos. I needed the board to see you under fire, to prove you're not what Richard painted. You saved them, Vanessa, every last one." Her chest heaved, rage and relief colliding as she stared at him, his calm unshaken by the madness he'd unleashed. She'd thought he'd abandoned her, thought his firing was the end, but he'd orchestrated this, a twisted gamble with her life, their lives, to test her mettle. She shoved him, her hands weak but furious. "You bastard, I could have died." He caught her wrists, his voice low. "You didn't. You fought. That's what I needed." Before she could scream, a suit approached. Linda Voss, the HR rep, her gray hair whipping in the wind, her clipboard clutched tight. "Vanessa Hart!" she barked, her tone icy. "You're fired. Instability, reckless behavior, the board's done with you." Vanessa's knees buckled, her fight draining as Linda's words landed, a final axe after James's confession. "Fired?" she echoed, her voice a ghost, her hands falling limp. Linda nodded, sharp. "You're a liability, proven today. Clear out." James stood, his face darkening, and turned to Linda, his voice a growl. "She's not the liability. I am. I quit. You're losing the wrong person." Linda blinked, her mask slipping, but he waved her off, kneeling back beside Vanessa, his eyes locking with hers. "I've got a new airline starting. Small, clean slate. You're in if you want it." Her breath caught, her head spinning as the tarmac blurred, firefighters shouting, passengers milling, the plane a smoking relic. Fired, again, after saving them all. But James's offer dangled, a lifeline in the ashes. She'd thought he'd betrayed her, thought the threat was Richard's last laugh, but it was James, testing her, breaking her, then lifting her up. News vans rolled in, cameras flashing, and reports trickled out. Richard's empire collapsing, lawsuits from tenants, regulators, now the airline, piling on as his bail hearing loomed, his release unraveling under the weight of exposure. She'd sparked it, her leak the match, and though his goons had struck, his board ally faltered. the bomb stunt backfiring as public outrage turned. Vanessa stared at James, her hands bloody, her body screaming, and nodded, faint but firm. "I'm in," she said, her voice cracking, a spark of defiance flickering through the pain. She rose, leaning on him, the tarmac a battlefield she'd survived, her uniform a rag, her career reborn in his rebel venture. Richard's cuffs loomed again, his empire dust, her fight validated, but the cost scarred her, body and soul. She walked away, limping, the smoke curling behind her, broken but free, her future a blank page she'd write herself. James at her side, the man who'd pushed her to the edge and pulled her back. She'd thought heroism would save her. Thought she'd beaten Richard, but James's twist, the firing, the offer, flipped it all. A shocking reversal that left her transformed, justice served, and a path ahead, uncertain, but hers. Vanessa Hart's journey in this gripping tale offers raw, unflinching lessons about prejudice, resilience, and redemption. Her initial dismissal of James Carter, rooted in snap judgments about his race, sparked a cascade of consequences that exposed the venom of systemic bias and personal vendettas. Richard Holt's relentless attacks, videos, lawsuits, beatings, and a staged bomb threat mirror how power can amplify hate, turning a single misstep into a life-shattering ordeal. Vanessa's story teaches us that ignorance isn't bliss, it's a fuse waiting to ignite. Her failure to confront Richard early showed how silence feeds aggression, a lesson in the cost of cowardice versus the courage to stand up. Yet, her transformation shines brighter. Through beatings and betrayals, she fought back, leaking Richard's past, proving grit can outlast despair. James's shocking test, staging chaos to reveal her strength, underscores that growth often comes through fire, not comfort. His final offer, after her firing, highlights second chances aren't handouts. They're earned through action. Richard's downfall, toppled by his own sins, reminds us that justice, though delayed, can prevail when truth cuts through lies. This tale warns against judging by skin, urges us to challenge bullies head-on, and celebrates the messy, painful path to self-betterment. Vanessa emerged scarred but free, a testament to human capacity for change. So, what's the takeaway? Prejudice poisons, but perseverance can heal, if we're willing to face the mirror and the storm. How would you have handled Richard's wrath? Comment below with your thoughts. Hit like if this story stirred you. Subscribe for more tales of grit and justice, and share to spark a conversation about standing tall against hate. Thanks for joining Vanessa's wild ride. Here's to chasing truth and triumph in your own battles.